Have you ever looked around your life and thought, why do I feel unsettled? Why do I still feel unsettled? Nothing is technically wrong. You are functioning. You are productive. You are showing up. You are accomplishing things that people admire. Maybe your career is progressing. Maybe your relationships seem stable. Maybe people constantly tell you you're doing amazing. But internally, something feels off. Internally, something feels off. Not broken, not catastrophic, just disconnected. Like your mind is busy, but your spirit is tired. Like you are emotionally stretched thin in ways you cannot fully explain. Like your internal life and your external life experience are no longer matching. And here is the strange part. The better your life looks externally, the harder it becomes to explain why you feel this way. Because people expect gratitude, not exhaustion. They expect confidence, not emotional confusion. So you smile, you smile, you keep performing, you keep producing. Meanwhile, internally, something keeps whispering, this isn't sustainable. This isn't sustainable. Today, I want to show you why high capacity people often feel emotionally off, even during successful seasons. Why productivity can quietly mask internal instability, and the hidden psychological fragmentation that slowly disconnects people from themselves. And somewhere in this conversation, you may realize that you are not lazy, you are not ungrateful, you are not failing, you are simply, you may simply be internally incoherent. You may simply be internally incoherent. And once you understand what that means, your entire approach to emotional health, decision making, and performance may change. They may change. One of the biggest misconceptions in modern culture is this. We assume external progress automatically creates internal stability. That is a misconception. But it doesn't. It doesn't. In fact, sometimes success amplifies internal instability. It does, because achievement can temporarily distract you from emotional misalignment. You're moving so fast, producing so much, solving so many problems, that you don't notice how disconnected you have become internally. Until eventually your body, your emotions, and mind start sending signals. They start sending signals. You feel mentally exhausted after simple tasks. You struggle to feel present. You overthink small decisions. You feel emotionally numb around things that used to excite you. You become unusually irritable. You start craving isolation. And the confusing part is this. The confusing part is this. Your life looks good. Your life looks good. That is why so many high-performing people feel guilty talking about emotional exhaustion. They feel guilty because they think, what right do I have to feel this way? What right do I have to feel this way? But emotional incoherence is not always caused by visible crisis. Sometimes it is caused by prolonged internal misalignment, meaning your habits, decisions, emotional needs, values, and pace of life are no longer working together. They are no longer working together. You have become externally functional, but internally fragmented. And fragmentation creates emotional static. Fragmentation creates emotional static. It's similar to when your phone has too many apps running in the background. Technically, the phone still works, but performance slows. The battery drains faster. Everything seems heavier. That is what happens psychologically. Your mind is carrying unresolved emotional processes in the background while still trying to maintain external performance. And eventually, you begin feeling off. Eventually, you begin feeling off without fully understanding why. You're feeling off, but you don't know why. Now, this part is important because high capacity people are uniquely skilled at functioning while internally overwhelmed. High capacity people are uniquely skilled at functioning while internally overwhelmed. They know how to, 1, compartmentalize, stay productive, 2, 3, manage pressure, 4, solve problems, 5, show up for others, and suppress emotional noise. Which means they can appear completely fine, while quietly deteriorating internally. That is why some of the most dependable people you know are secretly exhausted. They are exhausted. They are carrying emotional loads nobody sees. And because they continue performing effectively, nobody realizes how much they strain under. Nobody realizes that, including themselves. This reminds me of Iron Man in the Marvel movies. Tony Stark was brilliant, productive, innovative, capable, but underneath the intelligence and charisma was constant psychological overload. He kept building, kept creating, kept solving, kept working, because productivity became both his strength and his distraction. And honestly, a lot of high capacity people operate exactly like that. They operate exactly like that. They stay busy because slowing down would force them to confront internal disconnection they have been outrunning for years. So instead of recalibrating emotionally, they optimize externally. They set up more goals, more routines, more achievement, more productivity hacks, but eventually the nervous system stops cooperating. Yes, eventually the nervous system stops cooperating because humans are not machines. You cannot continuously override emotional reality without consequences. You cannot be able to do that. Eventually the mind begins resisting the pace the identity is trying to maintain. It resists. And that resistance often shows up as burnout, emotional numbness, anxiety, indecision, irritability, low motivation, chronic mental fatigue, or a persistent sense that something internally feels off, even when life objectively looks fine. Yeah, something internally feels off, even when life objectively looks fine. Now let's go deeper, because most people misdiagnose what they're experiencing. They think they are simply tired. But exhaustion and incoherence are not the same. They are not the same. Rest alone does not solve incoherence. You can take a vacation, you can sleep more, you can disconnect for a weekend and still feel emotionally unsettled afterward. Why? Because the problem isn't merely energy depletion. It is internal. It is internal contradiction. Your life may be pulling you in directions your deeper self no longer agrees with. This creates internal friction. Yeah, that creates internal friction. For example, you may value peace, but your lifestyle constantly rewards urgency. You may crave depth, but your environment demands constant performance. You may need emotional recovery, but your identity is addicted to productivity. You may want simplicity, while building a life that continuously increases complexity. Those contradictions slowly fragment emotional stability, and the body notices long before the conscious mind fully understands what is happening. That is why some people feel emotionally heavy during good seasons. Yeah, they feel emotionally heavy during good seasons. Good seasons. Because internal coherence has been compromised. And this is one of the core ideas behind my internal coherence recalibration model. People become emotionally unstable when their internal systems stop working together harmoniously. Your thoughts, your emotions, your pace, your priorities, your nervous system, your values. When these stop aligning, internal chaos quietly begins forming underneath external functionality. And most people don't realize it until their emotional resilience starts collapsing. They don't. They don't realize it until their emotional resilience starts collapsing. Here is the uncomfortable truth. Modern life constantly rewards external performance while neglecting internal coherence. Think about it. We celebrate busyness, visibility, achievement, speed, optimization, constant accessibility, but very few people are taught how to maintain emotional alignment while operating at high capacity. Very few people are taught how to maintain that. So people become efficient, but emotionally disconnected. They become successful, but internally unstable. And social media makes this even more confusing. Social media makes it even more confusing because people now compare their internal reality to everyone else's curated external image. So while you are struggling privately with emotional exhaustion, you are watching other people appear endlessly energized and fulfilled, which creates the illusion that something is wrong, specifically with me. That is the illusion, that something is wrong, specifically with me. But what you are seeing is often performance visibility, not internal reality. Many people who appear highly successful externally are emotionally dysregulated internally. They have simply become skilled at hiding it. And honestly, one of the most dangerous things about high functionality is that it can delay self-awareness. Because when you are still producing results, you are assuming everything is fine. You assume everything is fine. Meanwhile, your emotional system is quietly sending distress signals underneath the performance. Yeah. Your emotional system is quietly sending distress signals underneath the performance. So how do you know if this is happening to you? How do you know if this is happening to you? Let me give you some signals. You may be internally incoherent if, one, small decisions feel mentally exhausting. Not because the decisions are difficult, no, but because your nervous system is already overloaded. Even simple choices begin feeling emotionally expensive. Number two, rest no longer feels restorative. You take breaks, but still feel mentally heavy afterward. Because your mind isn't merely tired. Your mind is not merely tired. It is internally fragmented. It is internally fragmented. Number three, you feel emotionally disconnected from your own achievements. You accomplished things you once prayed for. You struggle to feel satisfaction. Yeah, you accomplished things you once prayed for, but you struggle to feel satisfaction. Not because you are ungrateful, but because emotional presence has been replaced by survival momentum. Number 4, you constantly feel behind, even when you are productive. This is huge. This is huge. Many high capacity people are not driven by purpose anymore. They are driven by internal pressure. They are driven by internal pressure. And pressure-driven productivity eventually destabilizes emotional health. Number 5, silence feels uncomfortable. This is a major one. This is a major one. When people are internally incoherent, stillness becomes threatening because silence removes distraction. And distraction has been protecting them from emotional awareness. That is why some people stay constantly busy. Not because they love productivity, but because they fear what they'll feel when everything finally becomes quiet. They fear what they'll feel when everything finally becomes quiet. Now, this is where things become deeply personal. A lot of people feel off because they have spent years overriding themselves. Yeah. They have spent years overriding themselves, overriding their emotions, overriding exhaustion, overriding intuition, overriding emotional needs, overriding internal warning signs. Why? Because somewhere along the way, functionality became more important than internal honesty. You learned how to keep going, but you never learned how to stay internally connected while going. Big difference. That's a big difference. You never learned how to stay internally connected while going. And eventually, the body starts resisting forced performance. The body starts to resist. That is why some people suddenly lose motivation for things they used to care deeply about. It's not always laziness. Sometimes it's accumulated internal resistance. The nervous system is essentially saying, we cannot continue operating like this. That is what the nervous system is saying. We cannot continue operating like this. And if people ignore those signals long enough, emotional instability eventually intensifies. Not because they are weak, but because prolonged incoherence always creates psychological strain. Because prolonged incoherence always creates psychological strain. So how do you recalibrate? How do you recalibrate? Definitely not through more pressure, not through pretending that you are fine, not through endless optimizing productivity. No. You begin by rebuilding internal coherence. Yes, you begin by rebuilding internal coherence. Here are a few foundational shifts. Number 1, stop measuring wellness purely by performance. Stop measuring wellness purely by performance. This is critical. A person can be highly productive and emotionally unhealthy simultaneously. Performance is not always proof of peace. Performance is not always proof of peace. Sometimes it is proof of survival adaptation. Learn to ask, how internally stable do I feel while succeeding? That question changes everything. Number 2, pay attention to emotional friction. Most people ignore emotional resistance until it becomes crisis. But emotional friction is feedback, not failure. Your emotions often reveal where your life has drifted away from internal alignment. Number 3, reduce internal contradictions. This is huge. Reduce internal contradictions. If your values say one thing, but your lifestyle constantly reinforces another, emotional tension increases. Alignment matters. Your pace, your priorities, your relationships, your environment, they must begin supporting the kind of internal life you are trying to build. Yes, they must begin supporting the kind of internal life you are trying to build. Number 4, reintroduce emotional stillness. This is difficult for high capacity people because many are addicted to stimulation, constant information, constant work, constant engagement, constant noise. But emotional clarity often emerges in stillness, not stimulation. And sometimes the reason you feel disconnected is because you have lost consistent access to your own internal voice. Imagine, you feel disconnected, it's because you've lost consistent access to your own internal voice. Here is the most important thing I want you to understand. Feeling off does not mean your life is collapsing. Feeling off does not automatically mean that your life is collapsing. Sometimes it's a signal that your internal systems need recalibration, a signal that your nervous system is overwhelmed, a system that your identity has outspaced your emotional processing, a signal that your external success and internal reality are no longer aligned. And honestly, ignoring that signal makes things worse. Ignoring that signal usually makes things worse because unaddressed incoherence compounds every time and over time. It affects decision making, emotional regulation, relationships, focus, motivation, confidence, creativity, and long-term mental resilience. Which is why emotional alignment is not optional for sustainable performance. Emotional alignment is not optional for sustainable performance. It is foundational. So, if you have been wondering, why do I feel emotionally off even when life looks good? Why? Please hear this carefully. Please hear this carefully. You are not necessarily failing. You may simply be carrying unresolved internal fragmentation underneath external functionality. You may simply be carrying unresolved internal fragmentation underneath external functionality. And the goal is not merely to keep performing. The goal is to become internally coherent again, to build a life where your pace matches your capacity, your decisions align with your values, your nervous system feels safe, your emotions are acknowledged instead of suppressed, and your external success no longer comes at the expense of your internal stability. Yes, your external success no longer comes at the expense of your internal stability, because sustainable success should not require emotional self-abandonment. And sometimes the strongest thing a high capacity person can do is stop overriding themselves long enough to listen. If this video resonated with you, subscribe to the channel, because every week we break down the hidden psychological and emotional patterns silently affecting high capacity individuals, and how to rebuild internal clarity, emotional stability, and sustainable performance. And in the comments below, I want you to ask something honestly. What is one sign that you told something internally felt off? What is one sign that told you something internally felt off, even when everything seemed internally fine? I read the comments and you'll be surprised how many people are silently carrying the exact same experience.